Thank you very much. 안녕하세요. Hello to everybody, and I would like to thank very warmly 이데일리 for having invited me to this Women's Forum. So I tried to abide by 이데일리's instruction and to put some colors in my presentation today, and actually I found it was quite easy and easier than I expected to find color metaphors or comparisons that applied quite well to the situation of women in leadership today. So I will organize my speech in four parts. First, the current situation. There are still a lot of red lights for women in political or economic leadership. Second point will be the causes for this situation, what I call the dark labyrinth of leadership. My third point will be promoting women's participation and equal opportunities. This is not an idea that comes out of the blue. And my fourth point will be how to greenlight a better participation of women in political and economic leadership. So first point, the current situation. I find that there are still a lot of red lights for women today. As you probably are aware of, there is an abundant research about women in leadership, and it shows that most sectors continue to make it very difficult for women to gain access to the highest positions. And this is especially true in fields and for positions that offer significant financial compensation. Among Fortune 500 companies, only 2% of CEOs are women. Academic and non-profit sectors have made more substantive progress at advancing women to the top leadership of their institutions. Overall, however, the gender gaps continue, with men holding a large majority of all leadership positions in both economic and political fields, and wages gap is still substantial. The World Economic Forum recently published its annual Global Gender Gap Report. And for the past 10 years, the World Economic Forum has analyzed gender equality in 4 fields: access to healthcare, access to education and training, women's participation and opportunities in the economic sector, and women's participation in the exercise of political power. The 2015 edition therefore provides a 10-year perspective on women's empowerment all around the world. I would like to comment a bit on the findings of this report. Of course, it won't surprise you, no country has achieved perfect gender equality. Among the 109 countries of the study, 104 have improved their scores in the past 10 years, and 5 have worsened theirs. From 2006 to 2015, the average income of a woman has increased by $5,000 to reach $11,000, which was the average income of a man in 2006. Over the same period, men have seen their income increase by $10,000 to reach $21,000. So you see that the gender wage gap is still very high. Gender equality has improved a lot when it comes to access to education and to health. But while women represent a majority of university students in 97 countries, they represent the majority of economic and political leaders in only 4 countries. The most significant development over the past 10 years took place in the political field. Almost half of the studied countries have already had at least once a woman as head of state. And women represent 18% of ministers and 19% of members of parliament in the world. In the 2015 ranking, Iceland is number 1, followed by Scandinavian countries. Korea, I must say, is number 115 out of 145. But let's say that it's a beautiful challenge to perform some progress. In France, we are number 15. And this good score owes a lot to the progress we have made in the fields of political empowerment. We moved from number 60 to number 19 position between 2006 and 2015. And since 2012, we have a parity-based government, and there are now 26% of women in parliament. And my experience is probably a good illustration of this development. I have been appointed as a minister before I was 40, with no prior political experience in parliament. And during the presidential campaign, the now French president, but then candidate, committed to appoint a parity-based cabinet if he was elected. Parity was used as an electoral argument that could win votes. And today I feel that it seems rather natural in France to have a perfectly gender-balanced cabinet. But as I often said in interviews, you have on one hand numbers and on the other hand you have behaviors. And I must say that as a woman, young, a newcomer in politics, I often felt, at least at the beginning, that the legitimacy of my appointment was not obvious to many people, even though my academic track record and professional background undoubtedly qualified me for the job. But to go back to gender gap report, I would like to add that our great weakness in France remains our score in economic participation and opportunities. Female professional occupation is very high, 67% in France, but my country ranks 132 for wage equality for similar work, which is a very bad score. And there is also a large gap in entrepreneurship. Women are largely underrepresented in company building and creation and have very poor access to funding and financing. I just created a VC fund, and I think we are only 2 women founders among the 30-something French VC funds. Studies suggest that the development of new sectors, like in technologies, should speed up the process of feminization, as they are less prone to preconceived ideas. But I noticed, as the Minister for Digital, that the majority of start-uppers and digital entrepreneurs were male, and in France only 1 out of 10 startups in the area of digital economy is founded by a woman. And this is probably because most of the founders were trained as engineers, which is mainly a male higher education scheme. So my second point, what are the causes for this situation? And I called it the dark labyrinth of leadership. There appear to be 4 categories of obstacles to achieving gender diversity: natural sector biases, cultural biases, workplace-related biases, and structural or policy issues. The natural sector bias and the cultural issues are probably the most challenging to overcome. Even though women outnumber men at most universities, the global average of women in senior management positions remains flat. One explanation is probably that few women graduate in the crucial STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM, and those who do often leave these sectors after graduation, resulting in a chronic underrepresentation in sectors such as mining, oil and gas, engineering, and as I said before, digital economy in general. Cultural biases such as stereotyping and the perception that females are less committed to their work also play a role, while workplace biases such as the gender pay gap and promotion practices are easier to remove. Structural obstacles can also be overcome relatively easily through targeted government or corporate policies. In France, for example, the very efficient and affordable childcare system, plus the early education schemes, certainly explains the high women employment rate. The many programs and initiatives designed to advance women over the past 3 decades have mainly targeted structural obstacles or workplace biases. But why has there been such limited progress? Maybe because the cultural issues remain the most powerful obstacles and that they are the most difficult to remove. And as a result, the current literature tries to analyze the persistent gender gap in leadership from new angles. While the glass ceiling has been the traditional metaphor used to describe barriers for women, researchers Alice Eagley and Linda Carley have described a new framework they call the Labyrinth of Leadership. According to them, the obstacles to leadership are cumulative and complex for women at every career stage. The roots exist, they say, but are full of twists and turns. Eagley and Carley describe the assumptions underlying gender bias as, I quote them, a set of widely shared conscious and unconscious mental associations about women, men, and leaders. People associate women and men with different traits and link them with most of the traits that connote leadership. Women are associated with communal qualities, which convey a concern for the compassionate treatment of others. Men are associated with agentic qualities, which convey assertion and control. So what would it take to dismantle these assumptions or these mental models for women within their organizations and throughout the culture? The two gender stereotyped leadership styles are often described as command and control, that's men, versus facilitative and collaborative, that's women. But 21st century leadership requires, I think, both facilitation and firm decision-making. If I look back on my own experience, I would say that I am the collaborative type, but I'm also the boss at the end of the day. And my leadership style is situation-driven, and therefore I know how to exercise both types of leaderships. I think that leadership requires a wide range of skills in order to be agile and to be able to navigate in multiple systems. However, I noticed that regardless of which leadership women practice, colleagues, superiors, or observers often perceive their behavior in a distorted way. Many women feel confined to what I call a narrow band of leadership, the small area between what could be called too wimpy or too bitchy. I could give a lot of other illustrations in France or other countries. For instance, women ministers are often described as hysterical or fragile, and the use of vocabulary by journalists when they write or talk about women politicians convey a lot of these stereotypes, and I can say, a rich experience of that very annoying bias. So in this challenge of leading effectively within the narrow band, there are two parallel approaches for changing the mental models of women and leadership. One is for women to exercise a wide range of leadership styles. The other is to increase the number of women leaders so that the association with gender is neutralized. At this point, I would like to hint at something that is very difficult to quantify or to study scientifically, but that has definitely an impact on the way ambition on women's opportunity and career schemes. It is the ambivalence in the way ambition is perceived when it relates to a woman. Ambitious women are often viewed in a negative light, as in it's all about her. And by contrast, men are allowed to be led by ambition. Some of my female friends in the private sector tell me how they constantly need to demonstrate to their peers that they have no hidden agenda to reach personal goals, but just try to get the work or the job done. Even if I don't want to draw general conclusions from my personal experience that is naturally limited in scope, I would say that women I met in the political arena were concerned about the exercise of responsible power. They were more inclined to know what the impact of their action was going to be, as opposed to just having power for power's sake. For me, the engine fueling my ambition for leadership was a desire to make a positive difference in my country. But if I'm perfectly honest, I would not characterize myself as an ambitious person. I was never obsessed by being number one, by having more than the neighbor, by reaching the top all the time. And that is probably why I wanted to be more intentional about what the outcome was going to be when I was exercising power. Sometimes the ambivalence about women's ambition can be deeply internalized. For example, I have the feeling that female networking can be very useful to overcome some of the obstacles women encounter on their career path. But I met some women who were reluctant to join networks because they felt discomfort at the idea to be so intentional about their ambition that they would strategize how to meet the right people. So they felt a bit uneasy about joining networking schemes. Ambition is, I think, a necessary element of achieving leadership that fuels professional accomplishment and drives results. But I think that untangling the ambivalence around ambition, both internally and externally, is essential to creating more receptivity to women's leadership. So now I would like to jump to my third part. Why is it an issue to promote women's participation? And what kind of issue is it? Is it about justice? Is it about morality? Or are there potentially other rationales? So promoting women's participation and equal opportunities, well, it's not an idea that comes out of the blue. In 2007, McKinsey published Women Matter, Gender Diversity, a Corporate Performance Driver. This study highlighted the underrepresentation of women in European companies, particularly in management and decision-making positions, and established a correlation between the proportion of women in management teams and companies' economic performance. This study is very interesting because it provides a fact-based case for change and makes gender diversity not only a social or a moral concern, but also an economic one. Indeed, it suggests that having more women in top management positions can be an edge in spreading new leadership practices within organizations and be a corporate performance driver. This idea is confirmed by other studies, such as Credit Suisse Gender 3000 database, which mapped the board structures and senior management of more than 3,000 companies worldwide, including more than 28,000 senior managers, of which nearly 3,700 were women. The results show that since the beginning of 2012 until June 2014, large companies with a market capitalizations exceeding $100 billion and with at least one woman on the board have outperformed by 5% on a sector-neutral basis. When expanding the period back to 2005 in order to include the market volatility incurred during the financial crisis, this amounts to a compound excess return of 3.3%. So companies that have women on board outperform the market. The return on equity of firms with women on their boards is also higher than those without. These higher returns then reflect in the valuations of these companies through a higher price to book values, which means that investors expect the management to create more values from the existing assets when there are women on the board. Furthermore, the proportion of earnings paid out as dividends to shareholders is also higher at firms with more than 10% women on their top management compared to those with fewer. So organizations that diversify their management and governance can expect higher efficiency and better financial performance. It is the same for non-profit or governmental institutions. So how can we make greater and faster progress in the promotion of gender equality and give men and women equal opportunities? So that's a good transition to my first point, how to greenlight a better participation of women in political and economic leadership. Since 2006, Norway, for instance, has applied a law requiring that females occupy at least 40% of listed companies' board seats. France has passed a similar bill in 2009, and it will be fully enforced on the 1st of January next year. Before the bill was passed, women amounted to less than 2% of the board members of the 40 biggest French companies. If no bill had been passed, I am absolutely sure that this ratio would still be under 5%. So of course that mustn't prevent governments or managements to push through additional progress. Male-led management teams who hit their quota may then believe that all gender issues are solved and ignore the substantially larger problem they have in gaps in female representation throughout their management structure or in wages. So I think quotas, because it's about quotas, may be a very efficient transitional solution to speed up the pace of change. I can probably come back in a few years to give you a feedback on the positive or negative impact of the bill that was passed in France, but I'm quite sure that it will have a very, very positive impact. Then a second point could be transparency and name and shame. I think that name and shame can also be a very good incentive for corporations and institutions. All publicly traded companies, for instance, should be obliged by regulators to disclose gender data and policies in their financial reportings. Then changing mentalities. It is probably the most difficult part, of course. I think that all initiatives that facilitate conversations about women and leadership are very fruitful. That's why I think a forum such as the one organized today by Ideilli and for the past 5 years is very useful. I also think that women who have rich career and diversified professional experiences should bring both peers and junior levels colleagues into such discussions in order to support other women in moving beyond the narrow band of leadership. So we, women with past experience or ongoing experience, have a responsibility toward the next generation of women to help them and support them. Reaching out to others, confronting professional challenges in the labyrinth of leadership, benefiting peer or senior counsel and support is, I think, very important for women to feel more confident at all steps of their career path. The feeling of isolation can sometimes be very harsh, even for women leaders, and the appropriate support is not always to be found in friendly or family circles. So I think women should really network much more. I want to conclude this speech by encouraging all young women present in this room to be excessively ambitious, even if I said earlier that I could not describe myself as ambitious. Because I feel that I was very lucky at critical moments of my life, and I'm convinced that ambition had nothing to do with it. But from my experience, I draw the conclusion that in a given situation, while a man will ask himself, is this position, is this job good enough for me? A woman will be full of doubt, and she will ask herself, will I be able to do it? Am I good enough? How will I manage to cope with my family life, etc., etc. And I want to say to all those young women here, in a life there are an awful lot of obstacles to overrun, so please don't be your own enemy and dare to reach the top. Thank you very much for your attention.